In this video, we'll explain Goldfeld Quandt Test, a statistical tool used to detect heteroskedasticity in regression models. We have 200 observations for 3 variables. The independent variable is labeled x. The 2 dependent variables are labeled y-hetero, which contains heteroskedasticity, and y-homo, which is homoskedastic. This is an overlaid scatter plot of both dependent variables against x. The red points show the scatter with heteroskedasticity, while the blue points show the homoskedastic scatter. Now let's apply the Goldfeld Quandt test to our data, step by step. First, we'll test for heteroskedasticity in y-hetero. Here is the list of 200 pairs of x and y-hetero. The first step is to sort these pairs in increasing order of x. In Mathematica we use the function sort by for this. Let's check how the data is rearranged. After sorting, the first data point is the one which was the 128th pair in the original data set, because its x value is the minimum. Here it is in the original arrangement. Watch how it moves to the top position after sorting. Likewise, the last, that is 200th observation after sorting, is the one which was the 141st pair in the original data set. This is so because its x value is the maximum. Next, we remove a fraction of observations from the middle part of the data. Let's remove 25%, that's 50 observations. That leaves us with 150 observations in 2 groups of 75 each. We call them the left group, with smaller x values, and the right group, with larger x values. We'll now run separate OLS regressions for the 2 groups and compare their residual variances. Here is the X matrix for the left group, and the Y vector of y-hetero in that group. Next, we input the matrix formula to obtain the beta vector left.
Now, here is the X matrix of right group. And Y vector of y-hetero in that group. We compute the beta vector right in the same way. To calculate the error variances of the 2 regressions, we need the residual sums of squares and the degrees of freedom for each group. Here we estimate these 4 required quantities. And finally, we obtain the error variance left and the error variance right. Next, we compute the F-statistic for the Goldfeld Quandt test. The rule is simple, we place the larger variance in the numerator. So, since the right group has higher variance, its error variance goes in the numerator. This gives us an F-statistic value of 5.175. Under the null hypothesis, the Goldfeld Quandt test assumes that both groups have the same error variance, in other words, Y hetero would be homoskedastic. Let's now see if our results lead us to reject that assumption. We define the F distribution with 73 by 73 degrees of freedom, since two regression parameters were estimated from 75 observations in each group. Observe the graph of this distribution carefully. Our calculated test statistic lies in the right tail of the curve. The area under the curve to the right of this point represents the p-value, which is almost zero. This is confirmed by the Mathematica output. Hence, we reject the null hypothesis, and conclude that Y hetero exhibits heteroskedasticity.
Now, let's turn to the dependent variable named Y homo, and apply the Goldfeld Quandt test to check for homoskedasticity. Here is the list of 200 pairs of X and Y homo. We sort these pairs in increasing order of X. Next, we remove 50 observations from the middle part of the data to create two groups. Again, we'll run separate OLS regressions for the two groups and compare their residual variances. Here is the X matrix for the left group, and the Y vector of Y homo in that group. Next, we input the matrix formula to obtain the beta vector left. As before, we repeat these steps for the right group, and then obtain the error variance left and the error variance right. Next, we compute the F-statistic for the Goldfeld Quandt test. Since the right group has a slightly higher variance, its error variance goes in the numerator. This gives us an F-statistic value of 1.108. Under the null hypothesis, the Goldfeld Quandt test assumes that both groups have the same error variance, in other words, Y homo would be homoskedastic. Let's see, this time, that how our results lead us to the decision of not rejecting that assumption. As before, we define the F distribution with 73 by 73 degrees of freedom. When we observe the graph carefully, we see that our calculated F statistic, 1.108, lies very close to 1, which is the center of the curve. The area under the curve to the right of this point represents the p-value, which Mathematica calculates as 0.331, and is shown as the green area in the graph. Since a 33.1% chance of committing a statistical error, if we reject the null hypothesis, is quite high, we therefore do not reject the null hypothesis of the Goldfeld Quandt test. We can safely conclude that Y homo exhibits homoskedasticity.